Matthew, welcome back to The Tangent. It's great to have you here.
Great
you for
to join you
doing
both
a follow-up
Thank you
episode.
for having me again, Father.
No, right. Guest Matthew, not Matt, host Matt.
Yeah, that seems right. You did leave it wide open, so.
I did. I went a little too broad there, I guess. That's true.
Yeah, it's okay. Speaking of too broad.
Yeah, well, it kind of leads me to the question as we were discussing last time in your book about ideology and evangelization and just those ideologies that sort of beset us on all sides, it feels like. So I guess what's wrong with the world and how do we fix it, Matthew?
Idolatry. Yeah.
Right,
Idolatry. This is something that I really began to appreciate once I started teaching theology at the at the university level right after I graduated, and as part of the curriculum, this is for introductory classes. We'd always cover the 10 Commandments, and I'd never really taught them before, and I thought we could get through them rather quickly, and then on to sort of the broader understanding of morality and the purpose of morality, things like that. But a couple things. One, I realized that most of my students had actually, even if they'd heard of the 10 Commandments, really didn't have any basis for even beginning to understand what they were, or what their certainly the context they emerged out of, or even more broadly, like how they fit within the Old Testament covenants versus the New Testament covenants. And this includes students who would identify themselves as Christians. So I realized very early on it was very, very much back to the basics. And also what I realized is that my own sort of misappreciation of the ordering of the commandments, that the first one is a prohibition against idolatry. And I used to think, well, that's obvious. Like, how many of us really are worshiping statues or figurines or golden calves or whatever it may be? That seems like check. That sounds like something that they used to do in the past, but certainly modern people, whatever problems we do have, idolatry is not one of them. But over time after teaching, it occurred to me, no, like everything else in the Bible, like, well, that's actually very, very smart. Why? Because all form and all sin in one form or another is a species of idolatry. It's putting some other good rather than God as our highest good. And belief is really not the best metric for determining whether or not we're practicing idolatry, because you'll probably find very few people in the world who say, yeah, I'm an avid idolater. That's definitely something that I identify
classify
as.
myself as.
Yeah.
Right.
Idolater. Those are my pronouns.
Right.
The tell is not what we say or what we think we believe, but how we act. And the way we act, and St. Augustine, this is at the heart of St. Augustine's theology as well, is living as if some other good but God is our highest good. And so I think that the broad answer to your very broad question, Father, is that we are all worshiping idols, different kinds of idols, but all unified by being idols. And that always leads to the dissolution of the self and the dissolution of society.
I'm going to accept that answer. I think it's a good one.
Sound good?
How many points?
It sounds good.
How many points? Oh,
no, I'll give you a full 10 points there. That's excellent.
Right.
I won't ask you out of how many.
Yeah. I went to the Greg, so 10 out of 10 is always good.
All right, I'll take it.
Yeah. I want to come back to that idea of idolatry though later on. But let's get into some of this other stuff here that I know Matt has teed up as topics here.
Yeah.
Because I think idolatry will rear its head again later on. And
Yeah,
I've got a later question here. So yeah, we'll come back to that, I'm sure.
So I want to quote from your book. Because I just thought it was great. And then I promise that when I stop quoting from your book, I'll let everybody know. That way they don't think it's you speaking and they know it's me. And so when it starts to get a little bit jumbly, you'll know, but they'll also be crystal clear. All ideologies, like different shaped cookie cutters. Look at me. I gotta move the book for a second. All ideologies, like different shaped cookie cutters pressing themselves on the structure of reality, seek to constrict the scope of existence, to fit within particular narratives. Whatever doesn't fit the mold is useless at best and dangerous at worst, and thus needs to be tossed away. Ideologies, in other words, are always tribal, not only politically, but also epistemically. They build walls and pour moats around their incomplete packages of truth and prohibit thinking outside those boundaries. I'm going to keep going here. This is still Matthew. And the danger, of course, is that we get trapped within one of those boundaries, each of us stuck in a thought bubble, either listlessly stagnant or running around in frenetic circles. Either way, when you are trapped in a bubble, all you can hear is yourself, even if the words come through someone else's mouth. And that's just how ideologues like it. Okay, now this is me. Prepare for it to get much worse. So given the structure of ideologies, I would like to, and specifically that idea of them resembling cookie cutters, right? Obviously, metaphorically. You know that. You wrote the book. But they cut things out. Right? And so it occurs to me, don't make me laugh, Father. It occurs to me that suffering, right, the phenomena of suffering is something everybody experiences, but according to your worldview might be experienced differently, if that makes sense. So given the fact that it's Holy Week and we're going to release this episode today, and you don't have to go through every single ideology you mention in this book. It is quite a long book. I don't want to trap you into that, But how do these various ideologies of your choosing understand suffering? And then how can we contrast that with the Catholic worldview of suffering?
Yeah, I think it's a really fruitful prism for thinking through ideologies in general, and then these specific 4 ideologies in the book.
But did you make a pyramid out of it?
I'm thinking more in the circle, but I could put some edges on it and turn it into a pyramid. Diagram it. So let's start with utilitarianism, because I think that's the one that speaks sort of most directly to the problem of suffering, because the whole ideology explicitly is built on the mitigation of suffering, and to the extent it's possible, the eradication of suffering, not only in your individual life, but societally as well. The greatest good for the greatest number, even in the very roots of utilitarianism, say in the thought of Bentham, is about how do we live individually and collectively in such a way so that we minimize pain and maximize pleasure. And so suffering within this paradigm is seen as not only a evil, but the evil to overcome. Now, the issues with that, of course, is that it's the greatest good for the greatest number, which should not be confused with the common good, which is the Catholic understanding. The greatest good for the greatest number means somebody's going to pay. There's really no way that we can construct our lives individually or socially in a way that there isn't going to be some kind of group that's going to have to bear the cost of this. Now, how that usually works out in practice is those who are deemed useless, those who cannot, in the calculations of we make in terms of relative pain and pleasure, cannot provide more pleasure than pain, functionally become useless to a utilitarian society. And so we see this kind of thinking play out, for example, in the abortion and euthanasia debates. But we also see it play out economically in terms of how, what would you think of an employee if you're utilitarian, right? You're going to squeeze as much as you can out of them. Employees are going to squeeze as much as they can out of their employers. So suffering, the avoidance of suffering, basically tears apart society because it makes all of us sort of vicious, highly calculative, but vicious animals who are trying to get as much as we can out of whatever circumstances we end up in a game that we all ultimately lose anyway, because death awaits us all, and oftentimes it's going to be uncomfortable one way or another. So it's at least the virtue of utilitarianism is it's transparent. It's not trying to tell us one thing and be another. It's saying this is the nature of reality. It's meaningless, purposeless. So maximize pleasure, minimize pain. I think
at least they're sincere.
Yeah, we can pause on each one. Yeah.
All I said was at least they're sincere.
At least they are sincere, and especially go back to Jeremy Bentham. I mean, he's like he famously called human rights nonsense on stilts, and his point was that like we as human beings try and create this sort of fanciful world in which these noble ideas or ideas we want to attribute nobility to sort of have meaning and give us structure and make order on reality. Like there's human rights, or there's good and there's evil, and there's there's public policy guided by the wisdom of the man. I mean, all these terms that we use, for him, he said, no, they're ultimately all meaningless. They're psychological crutches. There's pain and there's pleasure. And that's just the sum total of reality. And so good on him for that, in that sense. I mean, it's diabolical. Sure. I mean, but at least we can see it for what it is.
Right.
The other ideologies are a little harder to pin down. So let's move then to the libertarianism and liberalism. So I group those two in the book because they have common ancestry. They, in practice, oftentimes will debate each other. So libertarianism is the idea at its most extreme form that individuals are absolutely sovereign, and to the extent that there's any restrictions placed upon them, they must be 100% consensual and contractual. And that includes, I mean, you speak to some utilitarians who are like, I don't think there should be a police force because I don't want to be paying for somebody else's police. I got my private security. Or, like, I don't think there should be people who are fighting fires in neighborhoods where I don't live. That doesn't make any sense, economic sense to me. So that's the extreme form of libertarianism.
Right. And there's no common good there.
No, I mean, on principle, there's no common good. They see it as coercive. Liberalism, this is classical liberalism, not leftism, but classic liberalism. Is libertarian in the sense that individuals are sovereign, but especially within the tradition of a thinker like John Rawls, believes that there is some justification to recognize it's kind of all in our interest to have a society based on what Rawls, for example, calls primary goods. So they still believe individuals get to sort of create their own reality. They're still based on this idea of consensual society, but are more, let's say, liberal in the economic sense of that, but it's to everybody's benefit to pool resources and things like that. The fundamental issue with both of these strands of thought, which form one ideology overall, is that they say individuals are sovereign, not only in a political sense, but in that episteme over reality as such. So this term, you both heard it, you do you, I'll do me, sounds so innocuous. And it also sounds, kind of inspirational even, like, yeah, get off my back. And I won't get on your back. You don't get on my back.
It even sounds a little freeing.
Oh, it sounds totally liberating. Yeah. Like, who doesn't want to be completely sovereign over his or her own life? The poison pill in it, however, is that, one, it's a false anthropology. Like, it's not true. Like, we're actually not built that way. It's like, it's almost like a trans ideology in the sense that, like, it's making something up false about human beings. That's not our nature. Like, even think of the structure of language and how our minds work. We're fundamentally social in the very constitution of our individuality, which isn't to say we're not individuals or that have we individual souls, but that we're constituted by those people who are around us and everything that entails. So it's a false anthropology. But apart from that, it actually leads to a very similar kind of outcome as progressivism or wokeism, in that everybody gets to create reality according to their own whims. And what we end up with is chaos. We end up with, for example, boys in the girls' locker room. We end up with people on the streets of our major cities openly shooting opioids into their veins, and people saying, like, well, that's just their choice. I mean, who am I? Who am I to judge that choice as they literally rot in the street before them? And so liberalism, libertarians think it has solved the problem of suffering by just putting it off onto the individual. But in doing so, it's maximized social suffering because we have no common sense of responsibility for each other, but also maximizes individual suffering in this way. When you ask yourself, why am I suffering? The libertarian and the classic liberal say to you, you ask yourself, you give yourself your own answer. So we get trapped inside of our own subjectivity. That's a nightmare. Like, if you're actually depressed or anxious, like severely in a bad state in life, and an ideology comes along and says, what can save you? You. Right. It's like, that's the last thing you need to hear when you're in the dark.
Yeah, because you start
And so-
asking, why can't I save myself?
Yeah.
I've
Oh,
been
I'm
trying and
hopeless.
nothing
Yeah.
seems to be working. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I'm listening to you talk about the libertarian and liberal approaches. So the libertarian one really does seem to so exalt the individual that there's no sense of participation in society. Like there's no responsibility for it. There's a Saturday Night Live did a sketch with this with Ron Paul some years back, and the question was asked to him, given that you're a strict libertarian, say you're walking down the street and you come across a house on fire, and in the window there's a bunch of puppies. Do you save the puppies? And the guy playing Ron Paul says, "The puppies must die. It's none of my business."
They made their choices. I made
exactly.
mine.
It's like this very exaggerated, but I mean, taken to its logical extreme, that's what you end up with, right? On the other hand, it seems like with that liberalism ideology, what you're going to end up with is the exaltation of the individual such that everything in society is responsible for me.
Yeah.
So I'm at the center, and therefore everybody else has to figure out a way to make me happy. Everybody else
I think
has
it's
to.
a really fruitful way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we end up there again, it's either utterly hopeless. Like I have no role to play, so I'm end up being just an isolated self, and that's not very good. Or I'm constantly in this position of not being taken care of, and being also at the very same time, because I think this would be the flip side of that liberalism ideology, that I not only is society responsible for me, but I also am responsible for everybody else. And so I have to do everything to make people happy, even if one person wants to do one thing and another person wants to do the opposite. I have to affirm both of them in their wanting to do opposing things, and somehow keep the peace. And then that becomes just an exercise in absolute stress and anxiety. I mean, because I can't do both things.
Futility. Yeah,
Right.
It's futility. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's spot on. Yeah, you're sort of this specific one. Either you're like an emperor, or you're just a completely helpless victim. Both within the same package. One of the great things to think about as we're comparing the Catholic understanding of reality versus these competing conceptions of reality is that it's not like we don't have any data. I don't even necessarily mean empirical data, but like these ideas have been tried. Like this idea of libertarianism and the other extreme, the extreme sort of where I'm the victim and everybody else is responsible for me. It's been tried, and it fails not only on its own standards, it fails by any standards. And so these aren't just abstract debates we're having. It's like, well, okay, these are the ideas you have. They have been put into place. How did that work out?
Right.
And the answer is always disastrously.
Can you define for me common good and what I would contrast it with as private good?
Yeah, the common good. The reason I'm hesitating a little bit is to see whether or not the word private actually doesn't really fit within within a Catholic framework, and here's why. There's no such thing as an utterly walled off self. So I suppose there's levels of intimacy. There's absolutely levels of intimacy, and that would start with the family, and then the community around the family, the order amoris, which became so hotly politicized recently, but actually is at the heart of Catholic thought and sort of at the heart of common sense as well. But the idea of privacy, especially that it's been, so I would say contaminated by classic liberalism, libertarianism, is that there is such a thing as an absolute sovereign self. And there's not such a thing. And that would be, again, that'd be a false anthropology.
Right.
The common good is the right ordering of the different levels of reality under the recognition that, at least theoretically, not in practice, because it's not utopian, but theoretically, there is a way to structure reality in such a way so that everybody's good is co-implicative. So an individual's good necessarily produces society's good. Society's good necessarily produces the individual's good. The family's good necessarily produces the good of the neighborhood, and vice versa. And the reason I use necessarily is because there's like a metaphysical structure there that when things are properly ordered and people are acting according to the order that pre-exists us, like health, health
Right.
pre-exists us. And it's a question of, do we conform to it or do we not? The ideal of health. Then everybody lives to the maximum potential. So common good is not winner take all. It's not the greatest good for the greatest number. It's the recognition that there is such a thing as an objective order, that if we were to live according to it, then everybody would become the fullness of who they were called to be. Everybody would live to their full potential. Now, the huge caveat, of course, is that we are sinful. We're irredeemably sinful according to our own power, not according to the power of God. And that sin creeps into everything. And so it's folly for us to think that we can actually accomplish the common good in its totality, but it still stands there as an objective North Star for us to work towards.
Right. So this is a bit of a tangent. The reason I had contrasted, excuse me, common good and private good was because the framework that I've approached those terms through has been just like the just the way grace works, right? Like common good allows for participation. Private good would say that it's competitive, right? So like I used those terms to understand how free will exists, basically, right? Like how faith can be a grace and still free will exists. So I guess I wasn't using it in political terms, but I appreciate the showing me where private good.
I mean, it's not like necessary.
And as far as the Catholic anthropology goes.
Yeah, but the point's well taken, though. It's their privacy understood as sort of natural barriers or natural limits of responsibility. So, our house has a natural barrier to it where you're either inside or outside of it. And the idea is that there would be a consensual invitation if someone were outside of a specific scope were to come in. So it's fine. It's just the danger is when it gets when that libertarian anthropology gets imported in it. That's where the danger is. Yeah.
So not to beat a dead horse, but it seems then that a quick and easy way to sum up an element of libertarianism or classical liberalism is that it's just very egotistical.
I mean, it's supremely egotistical. It's paradigmatically egotistical and also delusional.
Okay, so
I mean, one of the images I think of, and I think I use in the book, is it's like kneeling before a portrait of yourself. So you are your own God, which again is absolutely delusional. For me to say I live my own truth is a mark of insanity. I mean, think of the pure implications of what that means. Like, I am the generator of reality. You're like a dime store villain in a comic book. Like that's seriously what you think about yourself and the world is that you create reality. And yet it's been, normalized through these, through politics and culture.
So
my Prado should not be located right in front of my mirror, is what you're telling me, right?
Move it off to the side.
Just slightly to the side.
So as far as suffering goes, then, I mean, obviously it seems like, I mean, there's an element of suffering for the Catholic that it's somewhat redemptive. And by somewhat, I mean, if properly ordered, it is redemptive. And so it seems to me like, according to these first two ideologies, there is no redeeming quality to suffering.
No, it's absolutely to be avoided at all costs, including costs to other people.
Right. So does that extend to wokeism, and then
it does? And let me give you another example, just real quick, before we moved on to wokeism. Please. So think of the euthanasia.
Matthew,
so
run this interview. It is not us. You're the boss.
I'm a guest. I'm a guest. I'm the Matthew to the Matt. So think of the euthanasia thing, right? So it's premised. A lot of it is premised on. It's my body, my choice. It's sort of the other end of the life cycle. And so if I want to choose to end my life, like how in the world would anybody think that they have a right to tell me I don't have autonomy over my own body to the extent that it includes my own life? But one of the ancient insights of why suicide, because that's what it's suicide. We can doll it up however we want, but it's committing suicide. Is that suicide is a radically social act. Like that's the reason why. And I'm not saying this is a good idea. They're endorsing this specific practice, but people who committed suicide used to be buried outside of blessed land, right? They were buried outside the cemetery. And you think, well, that seems harsh. That was why would you exclude someone from where they're buried? Like why does that matter? And the insight there is that because it's very dangerous to other people for an individual to commit suicide. Now we actually know this empirically, especially among youth. Like when this is highly personal in my own life, but we used to live in a city in California, and a young boy committed suicide who was within the circle of friends of our own son, who was very young at the time. And that suicide contributed to 3 other suicides within, I think it was the course of 30 days.
Gosh.
So suicide is contagious. It is contagious, especially among young people. But more broadly, it's this idea that when we make these self-destructive choices, they resonate and ripple throughout all of those who are around us. So no choice is ever made in absolute isolation. That doesn't mean we can't make individual choices. It's just to take away this, again, delusion that my individual choices purely affect me and no one else. It's never the case. And that's lost in the euthanasia debate. So going on to the wokeism. So wokeism actually has a lot of similarities with libertarianism and classical liberalism. One of the ways I depict in the book is that you look at on top of a table. There's 2 forces squaring off, 2 identities squaring off with each other. You have the libertarians on one side, and you have the progressive wokeists on the other, and they're like mortal enemies. Because one is calling for group rights, the other is calling for individual rights. One is calling for social justice, the other one is saying justice is only contracts. So on the surface, they look like these people are completely opposed to each other. Underneath the table, however, they're actually their ankles are cuffed together. They're like spawns, 2 sides of a shared fundamental error, and that's you are the creator of reality. And so what libertarians do is say, I am the creator of reality. And what progressive wokeists do is say, we are the creator of reality. They socialize the I into a we. And they instead of saying my truth, they say we're living our truth. But the actual substance in terms of its just subjective content is the same. And there's an added danger. So if I had to choose between a libertarian and a progressive wokeist, I'll take libertarian all day. Why? Because on top of that error, and this has to do with suffering, the progressive wokeist ideology says there's suffering in the world. I get to define all the terms of not only what that suffering is, but who's the cause of it. And so on top of it, the progressive wokeist ideology says privileged groups, privileged identities can not only define the nature of suffering itself, but also define its causation and say, all suffering comes from you, either individual or you group.
Right.
And so it introduces a hierarchy.
Anti-we.
Yep, absolutely. It's a scapegoat is built into it. It's not just that it happens when it's practiced. A scapegoat will eventually be found. No, it's part of the package. The price of entry is like, who's going to be the scapegoat? It's going to end up being you eventually.
It seems a little bit like in that place of finding the source of suffering, especially in that sort of wokeist ideology, you're going to find that pointing the finger is, if it's pointed at an individual, it's because that individual in some way either belongs explicitly to a different group or looks like they could belong to that group.
Yeah.
And so there's just sort of I think there's actually a failure to see the real individual and the person. And instead it's just easier to label somebody as belonging to this class of person.
Absolutely.
To this. which is also really interesting, because most often what you'll see in that in that sort of wokeist ideology is not just, okay, we've got to point to the cause of the problem and it's you guys, but the insistence that appearance is not the same thing as reality, and that anybody who is assuming something based on appearance is somehow failing to take into all this stuff into account. But it's the very same people who insist that if you see something and assume reality based on what you see, you're the bigot, are the same ones who then label people based on what they see.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's a catch-22. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the one way that it works out is like, so if you're identified as a target, as the cause of suffering, not for who you are, what you've individually done, because of what you represent according to the ideology, you have two options. Either you accept your guilt and thereby affirm that you are in fact a source of oppression, so you give in, or you don't give in and thereby affirm that you are the source of oppression. Why? Because only guilty people don't say they're guilty. That's the logic. That's the logic of this position. Again, it's like nobody wins here, because eventually, you're in power and you're the ones, calling the shots one day, but the victim ideology here actually produces a limitless amount of victims. And so it's just another matter of time before another group congeals, and all of a sudden you're on the other side of the table of the interrogation.
Is it
It's interesting too how those phrases will come out. Like early on in the the Black Lives Matter movement, the phrases that were being used actually kind of like they caught your attention. Well, first of all, yeah, of course, Black Lives Matter. And there's a certain sadness that anybody feels like that even has to be said out loud. Like that should just be something that we understand, right? Okay, I can be sympathetic with that. And then there's the idea of, I think they were calling it either implicit or unconscious bias. Like, are there things that you're biased about that you don't even realize? And I was like, well, I wonder. So maybe we should look at that. Let's examine our conscience and see, is there something that I'm not really aware of that I'm biased with? They talk about check your privilege, that there's these things that these advantages that you've had and everything. And I could kind of think back and say, yeah, I suppose there are some things that I've been blessed with, or things that have been handed to me that I can be grateful for, that I've received them and everything. And so, yeah, I could say that maybe I've had some advantages. The problem was that there was no opportunity to really pause and say, yeah, I realize that I sometimes think in a certain way and I should be careful about that. And so I'm going to be more cautious in the way that I think, the way that I view things. There was no room to stop and say, you know what, I have received certain things and I'm grateful for them, and I want to work so that I'm helping other people share in similar benefits. It was always, it's a mark against you that you've ever thought an incorrect thought, or that you've ever not thought according to what right now we're articulating as the way you're supposed to be thinking. It's a mark against you that you have anything that you have, that somebody once gave you something. The fact that you were raised in the family that you were raised in is actually a problem. And then you start to say, well, wait a second. Just like any human being, I didn't choose the country in which I was born or the parents to whom I was born. But this is the reality that I'm living in. And so you're blaming something that I have no control over for your suffering. That's where I have to start to question, what exactly are we doing here? Right? Yeah.
It was never a sincere line of questioning to begin with. I mean, if the request is that all of us should exercise humility in the kinds of claims that we make and in the beliefs that we hold, especially when those beliefs have significant influence on other or consequences on other people's lives.
On the common good, one might even say.
On the common good, yeah. And we have a responsibility to ensure that our beliefs are as true as we can possibly affirm them to be, then absolutely. But the path that you just led us down, Father, again, it's not that it can't lead to a good place, because again, It's all predicated on this idea that there's original sin, meaning that there's sin built in, but it's only built into some people, not to others. So there's original sin and original righteousness after the fall. So the fall has only affected some groups and not others. So some groups by definition are righteous, some groups by definition are fallen, and there's also no hope for redemption. So it's original sin, ununiversalized, particularized, with no hope for redemption. That is totalitarianism. I mean,
wow, that was a great articulation of that.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. Thank you for saying that. Original sin particularized. Wow.
Yeah.
with no hope for redemption. So
With no hope for redemption.
You're
Right.
you're doubly
Right.
you're in for a bad trip if you find yourself on the wrong side of that.
Is it fair to say that, like, when testing the genuine nature of somebody lobbying these questions, or ideas at you, one of the ways that we can successfully judge them is, are you giving me hope for redemption, or even an opportunity at redemption? You know what I mean? Like, is this something where it's clear that after I've thought about it for like more than 15 seconds, you're kind of just being a predator? You're just trying to pigeonhole me into thinking that I'm worse than you.
Yeah, I think it can. It always involves prudence. And for what it's worth, I do think that this ideology is now on the wane, and including the avatars of it have are rightfully shamed now in many circles. But insofar as you're engaging somebody who still has imbibed these viewpoints, I think it's a very important question you ask yourself early on. Am I being manipulated, or am I in a sincere conversation? And in a sincere conversation, fine. See wherever it goes. Have that sincere conversation. But if you're being manipulated, you don't have to talk to people who are seeking to dominate you. Like that's not that you're not being forced to do that.
Right.
So,
can I ask you a strategy question then? Because
yeah, sure.
I think that I tend towards assuming that the conversation is sincere, that the people I'm engaging with are actually serious. So, like, again, as a pastor, as all of this stuff was starting to unfold, like in the midst of COVID and everything, I was taking people at their word. I was taking these concerns like at face value as a sincere attempt. And then the longer it was going, and then add to that lots of other societal doubts that come during a time of pandemic and everything, and questioning, it started to dawn on me, and probably it took way too long, if I'm real honest, but it just starts to dawn on me that not all these people are being sincere, and not all of these ideas are coming from there's a deeper underlying thing that they're really trying to get at. And oh, wait a second, I tried to engage sincerely with insincere speech. I can't identify specific persons with whom I was engaging that were not sincere, because it wasn't so much with specific persons as it was with broad ideas that were being kind of promoted out there. So it was more engaging with ideology, right? I was trying to engage with ideology that I was trying to take as a sincere attempt, that in fact, there's something profoundly insincere about it. How do you keep that guard to ask that important question? Am I engaging with something sincere or something false?
I would, first of all, you can trust your gut. I mean, we get a sense, even our animal instincts will communicate to us when we're in the face of hostility. That doesn't mean, we don't go an additional step and see, maybe I am talking with somebody who's really wounded, who's really upset about something. And it's not really directed at me, but they're just not, they're allowing their emotions to dominate them. But that doesn't mean that they're trying to cause me harm individually. So we do have to take that additional step as well. But I think a fair question to ask up front is, tell me why you think your beliefs are true. To get truth as a standard on the table up front, not to sort of take a Socratic path towards it, because a Socratic path usually implies that both parties are actually engaged in a conversation, which we've established oftentimes that's not the case with this ideology in particular. So why you're going to be telling your beliefs, I'm going to be telling you mine. What's your standard of truth? Why have you found, as kind of a methodology, you don't have to use that word because people are like, pedantic jerk, but why have you come to these beliefs that you have, and what's their source? And then I'll tell you what I think. If people are being honest, most of the time they'll just actually repeat the claim, because they actually have never even thought about the criteria that they're using in order to justify their beliefs. It'll usually come down to some kind of experience or claim of experience. Oftentimes, it's not even their own experience. It's this abstract experience that they claim to be speaking on behalf of. And then once you sort of destabilize them on their own, what they thought was a firm foundation, and you find that they're just repeating sort of tropes, if they're sincere, then they might start to examine their foundations. If they're insincere, they'll just keep repeating it. And,
Right.
The conversation actually is over at that point, even if you continue talking. Why? Because there's no con. There's no width.
Yeah.
Father Sam, I wish that you had figured out this strategy before I got the phrase "I'm woke" tattooed across my chest.
Yeah. Awful sorry.
They said it wasn't permanent, and it is. That's what I was thinking about this whole time. No, I'm kidding. Is the way to analyze that question for ourselves to use your diagram? Right, to say, like, what's my standard of truth, to go through the concentric circles and eventually find my way to ontology and theology?
Matt, don't you see Matthew's diagram is the standard of truth by which we have to interpret things.
It's the methodology.
Is that the methodology? That's what
he has created.
Right.
He is the creator of that method of truth.
You are such a libertarian. Oh my gosh.
Proprietor.
Right.
And he's willing to sell it to us.
The middleman. Just the middleman. Just the middleman.
Right.
Didn't make it, not going to deliver it to its final source, just out there. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the reason that the circles actually came up out of teaching in the class and trying to take claims that the students were making in the class and try and organize them in such a way so that students would see that not only do their claims have implications, so they have consequences. So if they believe this, therefore they must also believe this, this, and this in terms of the implications of their view, but their claims also have presuppositions. They have assumptions built into them. And one of the ways that that I found very helpful for really, it goes to the sincerity question, but it also goes to kind of trying to find common ground, is if you can get someone to agree that human beings are morally equal, meaning no matter who you are, where you come from, what you contribute or don't, all the contingencies you can put on a human life, can we still say that human beings are valuable just for being human in a way that's absolutely equal? Most people will say yes. Now, some really crazy wokeists won't. They'll be like, no, they're white people are evil. They'll say things like that. It's just a new breed of racism. But most will say, yeah. Well, if it's true, okay, so you believe that's true, that human beings are equal. Well, it must be true in order for human beings to be equal, given all these diversities among us. And then you can take them on a journey down. So you move away from the political, which is going to be contentious, and take them down into the substructure where, like, okay, well, if it's true, then that must mean that there's some kind of shared humanity that we have that's not reducible to our race or our sex or whatever thing you want to attribute. Where's that come from? And where's that come from? Where's that come from? So I found that helpful for those who are actually willing to engage, is stick to that human equality thing, because that's a language they think they understand and agree with, but actually have never really thought through the implications of it and the foundations of it.
So if we're looking at human suffering, in the utilitarian view, it's just utterly useless, no matter if it's my suffering or the suffering of another. So it doesn't fit into the model. A libertarian view, if I am suffering, it's my fault. And if I work harder or if I do something about it, I can take care of it. If you are suffering or some other person is suffering, it's their fault and they've got to do something about it. There's nothing I can do to help them with that. In the liberal view, if I'm suffering, everybody else needs to help me not suffer. And if somebody else is suffering, I and everybody around me needs to help that person no longer to suffer. In the woke ideology, if I'm suffering, it's because I'm part of a victim class and have somehow, either immediately or historically been oppressed, hurt, deprived of things. And it's the responsibility of society at large to alleviate that suffering. Or if I am part of that society at large, that's the cause of the suffering, I have to change fundamentally everything about myself in order to no longer cause that suffering. If they're suffering outside, it's because of these ideas. And it almost seems actually like in that wokist ideology, there could be the danger of absolving oneself of needing to do anything in the face of suffering, because suffering is caused by something that I'm not part of. I'm above that. So all I have to do is talk about how bad that suffering is. I don't actually have to do anything to alleviate the suffering. So,
and the fact that I do have to talk about it is even a problem itself, right?
Right, because that causes me to suffer. Because now I have to suffer from that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that's a good summary. And so then the conservatism. So how does conservatism get him here?
Yeah.
Like so many things, these warring ideologies, when you go down deep enough, you'll find that there's some similar errors are being made. They're just taken in different directions. So conservatism is extremely complex, and I found this one to be sort of the most difficult to talk with people who otherwise think that like we're on the same page, is because everybody kind of has their own version of conservatism. So I just don't want to speak about it in two general ways. One is libertarian. Libertarianism oftentimes gets jumbled up with conservatism as well. However, the libertarianism has a different origin. Libertarianism is built in this idea of individuals are absolutely sovereign. And you can even take it back to like a Kantian kind of understanding of we can't say anything about the world. We can't say anything about humanity. All we have is the will, and the will alone is self-governing. And so that's the source of all morality. Conservatives in general, on the surface, do recognize one's sociability, so that we are in this kind of, we're all this in this together. And also recognize that there is a kind of shared responsibility for society. So that's like, oh, that sounds like we're off to a good start. Now, the reason I call it non-theistic conservatism is it's not atheistic. Most conservatives, sort of sociologically, are not atheists. In fact, a lot of them claim to believe in God, including the God of the Bible, when they're claiming to be Christians. What I call it non-theistic is they don't take I won't personalize it. The ideology does not take seriously the implications of us having one common father, of us having one and living in one common reality, and ultimately being one people. So it wants to sort of take the order and to extract the order and structure of the existence of God, and say, the world, it does have meaning and purpose, and there is an order and structure, but leave behind this idea that we are responsible for each other. That one of the implications of there being order and structure is that all of us do have the same Father, right? All of us are made in the image and likeness of God, and that has moral implications. So the reason I call the non-theistic conservatism, the way I define it, is they worship the god of fortune. It has two meanings. One is this idea of wealth and, the idolatry of the market as the highest good, not as a tool to serve the common good, but as the highest good itself. But also fortune understood as luck. So conservatism, this brand of it, non-theistic conservatism, will also say, well, look, these people are poor and these people are rich. And, there's just really nothing anybody can do about that. These people were born into these family structures, and these people born in these family structures, and it's kind of out of our hands, apart for some maybe superficial charity work we can do. And so it's non-theistic conservatism really sort of takes this idea that the way things are right now with me at the top are the way they're supposed to be. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. And I think that's also a form of idolatry. It's the idolatry of that just because, people were born in this family, or people born in this family, or this society, or this country, whatever, that therefore there's nothing we can do about it. And that's the way it's kind of meant to be. God has ordered there to be some people who are at the bottom and some people who are at the top. I'm at the top. Guess that's what God wants. Who am I to question God? Other people at the bottom. Guess that God wants. Who am I to question God? And let's leave it there. So this is where the Catholic social thought tradition breaks through all of that and says, no, to the extent it's possible, we recognize that there are real forms of social injustice that we can never fix, but at least mitigate. And that's built on this idea that we are responsible for each other within those circles, right? Family, community, society, nation, world of nations, etc. But we do have real responsibilities. And if we're not living according to those responsibilities, we're degrading our own humanity as well.
So then let's look into the Catholic response, both to suffering and just the Catholic worldview, sort of as a response. I don't know, should we look at it as a response to these ideologies, or as maybe not so much as a response, but as an alternative, sort of a contradiction of them? Because I think in a lot of ways that's what we end up being, is a contradiction. At the same time, sorry, this is long. I can't help but, like, as I'm listening to these ideologies, I'm feeling a little bit. I mean this as a compliment to you, Matthew. I'm feeling a little bit like I'm reading Avery Dulles, and as he presents models, models of the church, models of the priesthood, models of whatever it might be. That we kind of have laid out these different models, and then we sort of come to, now what's the model that takes out the best things from these? Because each of these models does have something good that can be extracted from it. It might be limited, it might not be very much, but there's something that we can take from each of these ideologies and say, there's actually a good that it's aiming for. And now we can rightly order that aim, and that good that is inherent there, or at least present somehow. And I think that would lead us to that Catholic worldview, that Catholic approach to suffering, that just the Catholic response, or the Catholic, I don't know, the Catholic Cliff of Dover, just that it's there. It's just there no matter what.
I think evangelically, I think it's very helpful the way you just laid it out. Like, okay, let's look at these ideologies. Let's find what's redeemable about them. And that provides a bridge to have a conversation. I think that's right on. I think in terms of the actual substance, however, that all of these ideologies are actually perversions of the common good. So it's not that the common good comes along and picks up the pieces of these ideologies and assembles it into the common good. That's why I use the term idolatry. It's that all of these ideologies have taken a piece of the common good, just a piece, and held it up as their idol. So what has utilitarianism taken its piece? Well, one is that God does intend, pleasure is part of the human experience. We're not Puritans, especially Catholics. Like, we're not Puritans, okay? God intends the goods of the body, and that's something we should take seriously. And as long as it's well ordered, let's celebrate the goodness of the body and the corporeal experience, and recognize that unnecessary pain. Who wants to have unnecessary pain? Right. So there's that insight there. The individualism of the classical liberals, libertarianism, is we are made in the image and likeness of God, and what that means in part is that my soul is not your soul. We're not part of a united soul. Like, we're not Platonic, we're not Gnostic, we don't dissolve into the great sea of being when we die. Like, we are individualized eternally. And so to recognize that means that does create a kind of boundary around each one of us, especially with regards to our ultimate destiny. Like, no, we can't save anybody ultimately, and nobody can save us. It's that individual relationship, and that has political implications. The wokeness recognizes that their social justice is a real category. They stuff it full of poison, but the category itself is actually justified. And having a well-ordered society is a shared responsibility. And the goodness of conservatism is to recognize that there is an objective order that precedes us and transcends us, and our goal is to live according to that, but not to take my place in that objective order in terms of my economic status, or to use the woke word, my privilege, as somehow being, I'm entitled to that just because I happen to have it. Now, I'm not talking about like redistribution of resources or anything like that, but that we are responsible for each other, and we have to recognize that responsibility as part of our very humanity and individuality. So yeah, each one of those takes a piece, but then distorts it. The whole package is in the common good. That's the source material. That thing gets remade into terrible sequels and things like that.
I like the movie analogy. Yeah, it gets remade into terrible sequels. Yeah. So then, as Catholics looking out at the world, it seems like we've got something that we can really offer, which recognizes these these truths, but packages the truth in a very different way. I mean, historically, if you look back and you see like, it's that, what is it, like a 2nd century letter describing Christians as they're very different. They're very strange. They share their table, but not their wives. They don't expose their infants. And if there are sick people, they take care of them instead of just leaving them on the street to die. I don't know what to make of these oddballs that have come to live in my city. They dress just like the rest of us, but they live radically differently. And so there's this sort of confusion that's presented by it. And I wonder if we're still confusing. Like, are we as Christians confusing people anymore?
Yeah, well, if we're doing our job right, we should be confusing.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that, you know, our goal is never to be countercultural for the sake of being countercultural. Like, if the culture's on the right track, we should be culture affirming. We should be culturally generators. We generators of culture, not like take the culture and we're going to find our position in relationship to it. To the extent it's possible, we should generate culture. But yeah, there's always going to be a kind of tension there. And I think that's caught in, you know, St. Augustine's metaphors of his pilgrims and the power that has. So what is a pilgrim? Pilgrim is moving through. Pilgrim recognizes that he or she is in transit. However, pilgrims take care of their surroundings, right? There's better and worse ways to be on pilgrimage depending upon the landscape and depending upon, you know, whether there's bandits on the road and so on and so forth. So we take everything around us, recognize its source in God, because everything comes from God. And to the extent we can, we're responsible for its flourishing, includes each other, recognizing all of this within the horizon that we are passing through. And so we don't make anything ultimate in this world. So we care for it. We genuinely care for it. We don't use that as some sort of empty, pious phrase. We genuinely care for it as stewards, recognizing that we're not God. We're not here to save it. We're not here to redeem it. We're here to live up to our full responsibility as individuals made in the image and likeness of God. And so with real responsibility, but also not God.
So ultimately that approach of we're pilgrims, but we're called to take care of our surroundings legitimately, truly. That's what JP2 is getting at when he talks about the culture of life. So can you just define some, I mean, there's the obvious ones, I think, of elements of the culture of life that are under attack, which is like abortion. It's like you could throw a stone in any direction and that's the one you'd hit, you know? But what are some of the elements of the culture of life that are under attack? Yeah, that's the question. What are the elements?
Yeah, well, definitely abortion and euthanasia are preeminent examples, but all of what that implies as well. So it's not just the actual issue, but the implications and again, the presuppositions of that. So what does abortion presuppose? Abortion presupposes that human life is discardable. That what gives human life value is whether or not it's wanted or not. That's the fundamental presupposition. I mean, think about that. I don't want this life, therefore it's not a life. So my will determines the value of a life. Well, that applies, of course, to the issue of abortion, but then that presupposition it bleeds through, it poisons all of life. Now, whether or not this person before me has value depends upon whether I want something from that person and whether I can get something for that person. If the answer to both of those questions is no, that person literally has no value. If you carry through this idea of human life. So it's not just abortion. It's everything gets instrumentalized. And ultimately it does become a war of all against all. So that has economic implications. It has political, world affair implications, all of it.
How has it's so people refer to it as the culture of death, right? So how has the culture of death worked its way into family life?
That family is this kind of like consensual arrangement of people who only have responsibilities to each other in terms of there's kind of a contractual understanding that you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Like, I mean, think of the epidemic of fatherlessness. It's nuts.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I created a life, but I don't want to, so I'm not going to. You know, of course, we have laws to try and to get at least economic resources from these men who have abandoned their fundamental responsibilities. But like that alone is one of the greatest sources of suffering in our society. But it's this idea that I am the creator of value, I am the generator of meaning and purpose, and I will not be bothered.
Yeah. You know, I talked about this with Stephanie Gray Connors the other day. Matt, I don't remember if you were still in the conversation or if you had split at that point, but it's this vocabulary that's often used. You see it in like celebrity news, that this person shares 3 children with this other famous person. And there's just something that, and I don't know if I'm right with this, my grammar might be off, but there's something about that phrasing, shares these children, or shares a daughter or a son with this person, that just kind of seems to take away the sense of, it actually seems to rob the idea of there being a family unit, because it can even be like shares with his wife, this child, like shares this child with his wife, like the kid is ancillary and or separate from the idea of their marriage, that the kid is just sort of this outside thing that they decided to pick up along the way, and like they share it like we share a car. There's just something really rotten about it that never sits right with me, and I think that's like one of those ways that the culture of death has kind of permeated into family life, in that we don't really see ourselves as belonging to this cohesive unit so often. It's, how is this useful for me?
Yeah. So St. John Paul II, the way he always conceives of freedom, the way he describes it, is freedom as responsibility. Now, on the surface, it can sound like, well, that's just another way of defining freedom. You could say freedom as autonomy. You could say freedom as liberation. He just says freedom as responsibility. It's much deeper than that. What he's saying is that there exists an order independent of our existence. All of us are contingent. None of us had to be here. None of us are entitled to be here. The fact that we exist at all is an act of grace. And so within this pre-existing structure, which is it's a metaphysical structure, it's also a moral structure, our freedom is to respond to it. We don't create it. We don't even direct all of it till its final end. We respond to it as it is. And so in a sense, the most commonsensical view of freedom is the freedom as responsibility. The most commonsensical view of morality is the gospel of life. Why? Because it's recognizing what's literally right before our eyes. You see this in the street interviews on the abortion debates. Like, people will admit that it's a human life and still go down this delusional path that they somehow, that it's not murder. It's not the illicit killing of an individual life to kill an individual life. So we have to start in reality. And the reality is we do not generate reality. And so our freedom we've been given is to live according to it or to rage against it.
So as we're in Holy Week then, preparing to walk the way of the cross with Jesus, celebrating the institution of the priesthood and of the Eucharist, these fundamental elements of what makes us a church, then being witnesses of the resurrection, which is the fundamental mission of the church to bring that truth into the world. Are there any places where you see these idolatries, these ideologies that have crept into the church that during Holy Week in a particular way we can be conscientious of and try to wrestle with as we stand at the foot of the cross?
Yeah, a new one has just popped out for my daily scan of the internet on the platform X, which I spend too much time there. It is helpful because you get to see trends in real time. And one of them within Catholic spheres, I don't know if you've seen this, is we should not be saying crucify him during Mass. Have you seen that? That's like a scandal now. Oh, well, good. You're not spending too much time on X.
I don't use it, but I'm intrigued. Tell me more what's going on
some
here.
Self-identified traditional Catholics who are arguing that is not only inappropriate Mass, it's actually blasphemous, that we would be saying, we being those who are attending Mass, who are participating in Mass, saying crucify him. And why that example came to mind for me, the question you just asked, Father, is that I think that's an idolatry of purity or false piety in this sense. Like, because I am a religious, because I am on the right side of all these issues, because I get it. Therefore, I would never call for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And it's like, are you serious? Don't you, like, did you participate in Palm Sunday? Yeah, you did. So you're going to lay down those palms. You're going to welcome your king, and then you're going to call for his crucifixion. At best, you're going to deny him 3 times. At best.
Yeah.
Right? So this idea that somehow being on the right side of the issues, being on the right side of the liturgy or whatever, is like exempts us from the darkness in our own hearts. So I would say there's a lurking ideology even within the inner sanctum of the faith, and that's this sort of this false sense of false security of one's own purity.
There seems to be like a libertarian element that I create my own reality, but applied to like ecclesial theology or the liturgy itself.
I like that. Yeah,
we are back again to what the concentric circles of theology would be. I can't believe we're ending here again. But you know what I mean, right? Like, I mean, this is definitely a tangent. But that's basically the reason why I choose to be Catholic. The reason I choose to be Catholic is that I think that, well, I'm convicted that Jesus Christ is God, right? But then I think that I'm not the one who can determine what that means. Yeah. Right? Like, so I think that there has to be some kind of church that sets out in I'm going to use the word absolute fashion. I would be open to, Father Sam or you, Matthew, correcting me there, but saying like, this is the gospel, this is what we do on Palm Sunday, as opposed to me being like, well, here's what I think, Yeah. So even there, right, like that political ideology has like manifested.
It has. It's really interesting. That's a really great point, because oftentimes the politics we adopt will bleed into our theology. Absolutely.
So what we're saying is that at the center of the theology circle is politics.
Oh, no.
No, that's wrong.
Matt, I think that's just I think you're taking a G.K. Chesterton thought there and trying to live it out. That I think it's Chesterton. He says something to the effect that to be Catholic is to confront the reality that somebody other than you might know more than you, right, or something like that.
And that you can live according to that as an act of freedom. So I am submitting. An act of submission is a free act. And one of the things to get on the table as well with this, so why we see suffering as valuable. Well, one, it's a necessary part of being alive because of sin, and so there's a sense in which it's inscribed in the nature of reality that we're not going to escape it. So there's a kind of acceptance of it. But even beyond the acceptance, why does it have value? Well, it's been carried up into the cross by Christ. It has value that way, but it also has value in this very specific respect. When I'm suffering, genuinely suffering, not just inconvenienced or annoyed or whatever, when I'm actually in the dark and I'm in pain, and in that pain, I say yes to the Lord. And I mean it to the extent it's possible for us to be sincere about anything. I truly say, yes, I trust you, Jesus. I accept whatever this is. Even as I pray for its mitigation or its resolution, I recognize that you've allowed it to be in my life at this time. I've given a yes that's been shorn. It's been completely purified of any self-interest, of any ulterior motives, of any kind of calculation. When you say yes to God in the dark, then you've truly said yes. It's not the neurons firing. It's not your bodily desires trying to work out a way so you get what you want. It's I become free. I've genuinely become free in that darkness to say yes to the Lord, and it's shorn from wanting to get something from Him. When we can say that, then we truly said yes to the Lord. And I don't think it's possible to do that without suffering. So suffering creates the possibility for real freedom, which is to say yes to the cross. And that way we participate in Christ's own redemptive suffering, who, paradigmatically says yes to the cross. No other ideology can provide that.
At the risk of maybe over-exalting Thanos.
Okay.
Which, not a great move, right?
I would even say not exalting at all.
Well, no, insofar as like
just for the record.
Thanos is seeking balance in the universe, he's going to snap his finger and create the balance by getting rid of half of everything. Somehow getting rid of 50% will strike balance. And I think he's thinking it will eliminate suffering, but he ends up causing all this terrible suffering.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't want to exalt that at all, but there is a certain place in which I can say, I know it's the right thing to do. I know that Thanos is the bad guy. I definitely am aware of his villainy. But there's this one part of like in the darkness saying yes, submission to something bigger than ourselves. But there's also, I think, a very human need, and this is where the balance comes in. There's like this very human need to be able to say, this is wrong. This thing is, something needs to be done about this. And I think in the church, there can be a tendency to avoid pointing out the flaws.
Yeah, sure.
Because like this was the roots of, in some ways, the sex abuse scandal, right? The clerical culture that said, we don't want to cause scandal to anybody. So we're going to ignore this. So at some point there's got to be the ability for us to also point out the things that are wrong, while still being able to engage in that submission of mind and will to authority that God has given on earth, to those things that are beyond our ability to comprehend. But there are some times when the very human makes it very difficult to understand where that line is and what that proper, true, authentic balance really is.
Yeah.
Matthew, how would you say we might navigate that?
There's like lots of psychological evidence for this, but it's also something that we could, I suppose, see intuitively even before it was studied, is that the more you focus on yourself, the more miserable you are. Which means that the correlative of that is that in order to not be miserable, stop focusing on yourself. So when we've accepted our own cross, that doesn't mean we stay there and just hold on into the dark.
Right, and bemoan it.
Yeah. We accept it, and then we look up and we see what other darkness out there might we be able to help mitigate. Where can we bring a light? That is actually how you get out of the dark. That's the pathway out of this sort of deep. So to remember that the crucifixion is not just this individual act that Christ takes upon himself. It's an individual act that Christ takes upon himself for the sake of all humanity. And so we participate in suffering that way as well. I take upon my individual sufferings for the sake of others. So I don't stop in that acceptance. And I think to get to your question, Father, is okay. So to the extent that we look up and out after having accepted our cross, where do we see that there is unnecessary suffering that we can actually do something about? And that's where we focus our energies.
So in other words, those propositions are not mutually exclusive things. But
no, they're actually tied. To the extent I accept my cross means that I am made a principled commitment to help others carry theirs.
Yeah. I think it's so easy to think that they must be opposed to one another. Either I submit, either I say yes in the darkness, or I fight for justice. I carry my own torch. I do my own thing, instead of realizing that those things don't need to be quite so separate from one another.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the place that we enter into the Holy Week the most, right?
That's right.
Standing at the cross and recognizing that. That's awesome. Nicely said. Thank you.
Oh, thanks both of you. These are great conversations. I really benefit from them. I do.
We're considering
glad to
that
have
you
you
came
back on.
We're glad that you enjoyed it.
It's a gift. Yeah, exactly.
Repeat customer. See.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, the book is Evangelization and Ideology.
Yes.
Okay, good. I was terrified for a moment that I was inverting the words. Evangelization and Ideology, available at Word on Fire. Check out Matthew Petrusek's good work there at the Word on Fire and the Word on Fire show. Matthew, thanks for being with us. Blessed Holy Week and Happy Easter.
Blessed Holy Week to both of you as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching today's video. Let us know what you thought down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.